Dad, can we have ice cream after? Emma tugged at Mark's sleeve as they walked through the hospital corridor. We'll see, sweetheart, Mark replied, balancing a coffee in one hand while checking his phone with the other. He wasn't actually Emma's father, or the father of Lily and Sophie, the identical triplets who had somehow adopted him during this hospital visit. But something in their pleading eyes when they'd whispered, "Please pretend you're our dad, just for today," had broken through his defenses. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected connections and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming content that reminds us how life's greatest gifts often come when we least expect them. Mark Wilson had been having tea alone in the hospital cafeteria, killing time before his follow-up appointment. 6 months as a single father after losing his wife to cancer had taught him to treasure these rare moments of solitude. The 3 identical 7-year-old girls had appeared seemingly from nowhere, sliding into the chairs around his table with the confidence of children who hadn't yet learned to fear strangers. "Hi, I'm Lily," said the first, her dark curls bouncing as she settled into the chair. "I'm Sophie," said the second, adjusting her glasses. "And I'm Emma," said the third, immediately reaching for his untouched cookie. Before Mark could process what was happening, Emma leaned forward and whispered, "Can you pretend you're our father? Just for a little while? Our aunt fell asleep, and we're bored." Perhaps it was the echo of loneliness that had followed him since Sarah's death, or maybe it was simply the disarming directness of children, but Mark found himself nodding. "I'm Mark," he said, offering his hand formally to each girl in turn. "Apparently, I'm your dad for the next, how long exactly?" "Until Aunt Melissa wakes up," Sophie explained seriously. "She's watching us while Mom has her treatment." Mark's heart sank. He recognized that particular euphemism all too well. "Your mom is sick." The triplets nodded in unison. "She has cancer," Lily said matter-of-factly. "But she's going to get better." Mark felt a pang of grief mixed with something else, a strange kinship with these children and their unseen mother. "Well then," he said, pushing his cookie toward Emma, "I guess we should split this fairly among all my daughters." What began as a simple act of kindness to entertain 3 bored children quickly evolved into an elaborate game. The girls led him on a tour of the hospital's public areas, introducing him as "our dad" to anyone who would listen. Mark played along, surprising himself with how naturally he fell into the role. When Sophie announced she needed to use the restroom, Mark waited outside while Lily and Emma kept him company. "Our real dad left when we were babies," Lily informed him, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. "Mom says he wasn't ready to be a father." "That's his loss," Mark replied honestly. "You 3 are pretty amazing." Emma beamed. "We know." After Sophie rejoined them, the girls began to grow restless. "Can we go see if Mom's done yet?" Emma asked. Mark hesitated. "I don't think I should." "Please," 3 voices chorused, and Mark found himself outvoted. "Lead the way," he surrendered, "but I'll just drop you off at the door." The girls raced ahead, turning it into a game as they darted around corners and through hallways. Mark quickened his pace, worried about losing sight of them in the labyrinthine hospital corridors. When he rounded the final corner, the triplets were already pushing open a door. "Girls, wait," Mark called, hurrying after them. He stepped into the room just as a weak voice asked, "Who's your friend?" The woman in the hospital bed was thin, her complexion pale, but her eyes were bright and alert. And 4 stands stood beside her, and a colorful scarf wrapped around her head suggested the reason for her hospitalization. "This is Mark," Emma announced proudly. "He's been pretending to be our dad." Mark felt his face flush with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry for the intrusion. The girls asked me to play along, and I kidnapped my children for an hour?" The woman's lips curved into a smile. "Thank you. Melissa texted me that she'd fallen asleep. I was worried they'd be bored to tears." "Mom, he gave us his cookie," Sophie reported. "A true hero," the woman said, her eyes meeting Mark's. "I'm Rebecca Chen." "Mark Wilson," he replied, stepping forward to shake her hand. I should go. Do you have somewhere to be? Rebecca asked. Mark checked his watch. Not for another hour. Then stay, she said simply. The girls clearly approve of you, and that's not easy to earn. Mark hesitated, then pulled up a chair. How are you feeling today? He asked. Honestly? Terrible, Rebecca answered. But better now that I have visitors. The girls tell me you're quite the storyteller. Mark laughed. I may have embellished a few tales about my adventures as a landscape architect. He said he built a garden on top of a skyscraper, Lily informed her mother. I did actually do that, Mark said. Downtown, the Meridian building. The one with the butterfly sanctuary? Rebecca's eyes widened. I wrote an article about that project for the City magazine last year. You're a writer? Journalist, she corrected. Though cancer has put that on pause. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by the girls' interruptions and questions. Mark found himself drawn to Rebecca's sharp wit and the grace with which she handled her illness in front of her daughters. When a nurse arrived to check Rebecca's vitals, Mark realized he'd stayed far longer than intended. I should go, he said, standing reluctantly. I have an appointment. Are you sick too? Emma asked worriedly. Mark shook his head. Just a checkup. I broke my arm a few months ago. Will you come back? Sophie asked, adjusting her glasses as she looked up at him. Mark glanced at Rebecca, unsure how to respond. Our room number is 415, Rebecca said quietly. If you're ever in the neighborhood. Mark hadn't planned to return, but 2 days later he found himself outside room 415 with a stack of magazines and a small potted plant. The girls greeted him like a long-lost friend, and Rebecca's smile made something in his chest tighten. His visits became regular, twice a week at first, then nearly daily. He brought books for the girls and take-out food that Rebecca might actually want to eat. Sometimes he arrived to find Rebecca sleeping, and he would sit quietly with the triplets, helping with homework or playing silent games of tic-tac-toe. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep on the small couch in Rebecca's room, she asked the question he'd been dreading. Why are you really here, Mark? Not that I'm complaining, but most people run from cancer, not toward it. Mark was silent for a long moment. My wife, Sarah, died of breast cancer last year, he finally said. Our son, Jamie, is 4. He's with my mother tonight. Rebecca's eyes softened. I'm sorry. I couldn't save her, Mark continued, his voice low. I did everything right, the best doctors, the clinical trials, the organic foods, the positive thinking, and none of it mattered. And now you're trying to save me? There was no accusation in her tone, only gentle understanding. No, Mark said, surprising himself with the truth of it. I'm not trying to save anyone. I know what it's like, being in this room. And I know what it's like for the girls, watching someone they love go through this. Rebecca reached for his hand. Thank you for being honest. I should have told you sooner. Would you have come back if you had? Mark considered this. Probably not. Then I'm glad you waited. Rebecca squeezed his hand. For what it's worth, I'm not planning on dying anytime soon. Stage 2, good prognosis. The treatment is brutal, but effective. Relief washed over Mark, followed immediately by guilt. Sarah's prognosis had been good too, until suddenly it wasn't. One day at a time, he said, echoing the mantra that had carried him through his darkest days. One day at a time, Rebecca agreed. The weeks turned into months. Rebecca completed her chemotherapy and began radiation. Mark was there for her final treatment, the triplets and Jamie celebrating with balloons and a cake decorated with the words, "Cancer sucks but you don't." As Rebecca's strength returned, their relationship evolved. Mark introduced her to Jamie, who immediately bonded with the triplets despite the age difference. They began spending time together outside the hospital, picnics in the park, movie nights, Sunday brunches that stretched into dinner. 6 months after they met, Mark took Rebecca back to the hospital cafeteria where it all began. "Why are we here?" she asked, wrinkling her nose at the institutional smell. Mark smiled nervously. "I wanted to come full circle." He led her to the exact table where the triplets had found him, now decorated with a small vase of flowers. As they sat down, the girls appeared with Jamie, all 4 children grinning conspiratorially. "What's going on?" Rebecca asked, looking between Mark and the children. Mark took her hand across the table. "Rebecca Chen, when your daughters asked me to pretend to be their father, I had no idea I would end up wishing it were true." Rebecca's eyes widened as Mark slid from his chair to one knee beside the table. "I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated," he continued, "but I've learned that life is too short to waste time when you're sure about something. And I'm sure about you, about us." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be a real father to your amazing daughters, and let me love you for as long as we have?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? My cancer could come back, Anne." "I'm sure," Mark interrupted. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Rebecca looked at her daughters, who were practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you 3 know about this?" "We helped pick the ring," Sophie said proudly. "And I kept the secret," Jamie added, his chest puffed out importantly. Rebecca turned back to Mark, who was still kneeling patiently. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." The cafeteria erupted in applause as Mark slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger and the children launched into a group hug that nearly toppled them both. They were married exactly 1 year after their first meeting, in the hospital garden where they had taken many walks during Rebecca's recovery. The triplets served as bridesmaids, and Jamie as ring-bearer. Rebecca's hair had grown back in soft curls that framed her face beneath a crown of fresh flowers. During the reception, Mark found himself momentarily alone, watching as Rebecca danced with the children, all 4 of them laughing as they tried to coordinate their movements. A nurse who had cared for Rebecca during her treatment approached him, champagne glass in hand. "Quite a journey you've had," she observed. Mark nodded, unable to take his eyes off his new family. "Not the one I expected." "The best journeys rarely are," the nurse replied. "You know, I remember the day those girls dragged you into her room. Rebecca had just received some difficult news about her treatment options. She told me later that your visit was the first time she'd laughed in weeks." Mark hadn't known this. "We saved each other," he said quietly. The nurse smiled. "That's how it should be." As if sensing his gaze, Rebecca looked up and met his eyes across the room. She whispered something to the children, and all 4 of them made their way toward him. "What are you doing standing here all alone?" Rebecca asked, slipping her arm through his. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Mark replied. "We're the lucky ones," Lily declared. "Yeah," Emma agreed. "We got a dad and a brother. And ice cream," Sophie added practically. "You promised ice cream after the ceremony." Mark laughed, pulling all 5 of them into an embrace. "So I did." As they walked together toward the future they would build, Mark reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A chance encounter, 3 little girls who needed a pretend father for an afternoon, and a woman brave enough to open her heart despite an uncertain tomorrow. Sometimes, he thought, the family you find is exactly the family you need. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate love, hope, and the beautiful coincidences that change our lives forever. Remember that sometimes the greatest chapters of our lives begin with the smallest moments of kindness.